Radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, welcome, Fade to Black. How you doing? How you doing? Today is Tuesday, May 28, 2024. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, and tonight, Dr. Robert Schoch. That's right. And I know that I say this a lot, but tonight, I really mean it. Dr. Schoch is one of my close friends, but he's also somebody that I have an immense amount of respect for and has guided me through my career and brought me to where I am tonight. And we've done a lot of interviews, we've done a lot of conferences, we've done a lot of things together over the years, and every conversation is great. And tonight is going to be another one of those. Nothing on the agenda. The show was called The History of Us, which means I get to get inside of his head once again, and we are going to do all of that. We've had an amazing week. Tim Swartz on the show last night. Tonight, Robert's with us. And tomorrow night, actor and comedian Dave Foley is here with his partner on his podcast, screenwriter Tom Wheeler. And we are going to be talking about all things UFO and UAP related, and probably get into some paranormal and supernatural as well. Tomorrow's going to be a great show. Thursday night, no show. I will be out at Contact in the Desert for one night only. Thursday night, I will be hosting their 10th anniversary party in the Crystal Ballroom at the Renaissance Hotel in Palm Springs. And then I've got a couple of things I'm doing Friday morning for them. And then I'm back to work. But I will see everybody Thursday night at Contact in the Desert. Okay. All right. Let's get things rolling. Tonight, we're going to be talking to Robert Schoch about all of his latest research into the history of civilization. And this is a touchy subject when it comes to academia. And Robert has always chosen to go where the evidence takes him. And so that's what we are going to do tonight. And when we get into the subjects of the early cycles of human development and what was involved with that, it gets really strange in academia. And we're going to be talking about that too as well. He's a Ph.D., of course, full-time faculty member at Boston University since 1984, earned his doctorate in geology and geophysics from Yale University in 1983, serves as the director of the Institute for the Study of the Origins of Civilization at Boston University's College of General Studies. Of course, it was in the early 1990s when he did his analysis of the Great Sphinx of Egypt and started to redate things. His interests span geology, anthropology, environmental science, and paleontology, with a fossil mammal genus named in his honor. He's authored many books and articles, including Forgotten Civilization and Origins of the Sphinx, and of course his wife, Katie, travel around the world to bring us knowledge. His website is robertschoch.com, and I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black my good friend, your good friend. There he is, Robert Schoch. Robert, you look younger. Will you do me a favor?
Oh.
Share whatever you're drinking. I don't know, man. I don't know, but just share with us whatever you're drinking. Welcome back to the show.
Because I'm not, well, maybe I am feeling younger. You're making me feel younger, so I appreciate that.
Right on. We've got a lot to cover tonight, and rather than ask the normal questions. How have you been? And all of that. You've been great. Okay. Because there's too much to discuss. And I actually want to start here. You said to me many years ago, it's probably 9 years ago, and I've quoted it a lot since then. But you said to me in front of an audience of like 2,500 people, we weren't alone, but you said to me, I still can't say the other A word. Aliens is okay. Atlantis is where you can't go in academia. And so I kind of want to start there. Is it getting looser in academia to start to get into these fringe topics? And certainly the origins of Homo sapien is a touchy subject in anthropology and history. Is it safer ground to dip your toe into?
That's a hard thing to answer because I think we have a real diversity in academia right now. And the reason I say that is when I first got involved in these, I mean, we're talking well over 30 years for me. We're talking 40 years basically that I've been into this in a PhD sense. Well, you mentioned I got my PhD in 83. So I've been around a long time, and I've now seen a couple of generations. And I would say that you still have the academics of the older generations. You still have that being perpetuated, but we also have the newer generation coming on. So we have the newer generation of academics coming in who I think are more open. And when I say more open, basically looking at the evidence and taking the evidence seriously. So just to give a little anecdote, little story here. I remember 20, 30 years ago, I would cringe when some colleague told me that I was mentioned in some academic paper or someone's dissertation, etc., because it was invariably to criticize me and basically, say bad things about me. And academics will sometimes do that using all their own jargon, and we understand what they're saying. Now I don't anymore because often it's to the opposite. I'm mentioning someone's dissertation. They're actually taking the work seriously or supporting it, that type of thing. So it's still a mixed bag, but I do think things are slowly turning around, but certainly not as fast as I would like to see it. And certainly there's still a lot of controversy and a lot of disagreement and a lot of things that certain academics, should we say, will just shut their eyes to, will just, they just don't want to face. So
did you ever get to the point in the past where you almost tapped out? Like this is not worth it. Did it?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I'll admit that I have, but I tried to stay strong and whatnot. And I have had many times, so I think this ties in with it. I've had many times, especially early in my career. So let's say the first 10 years of beyond my PhD. So late 80s, early 90s, when I was advised by senior faculty members, senior academicians, that I was really going on a bad path. I was going on the wrong path. This was not good for my career. It turns out it was not good for my career from my academic point of view, because, I don't want to be having suffered, but I have in academic sense to a certain extent, but I've tried to overcome that now. But getting back to my point, I had many people tell me in good faith, other academics, senior faculty members, people who wanted to be my quote mentor when I was a young academic, that no, what you should do is just specialize in one thing. You mentioned that I have training in paleontology, and I do. And I've named new fossil species and that type of thing, new to science. And they would counsel me, okay, you are the expert in X, Y, and Z. It doesn't matter that only 6 other people in the world care about that when it comes right down to it, but just follow that narrow path. It's non-controversial. You make your name in a quote academic sense. You'll publish the papers that, and this is me speaking now, that only 10 other people will read if you're lucky, but it has academic prestige, et cetera, et cetera. You'll go on a nice, smooth path of, up the ranks of academia and promotion, and everything will be dandy. And well, no, maybe no one will care about you in a broader sense, but you'll have academic immortality because, your papers will be read by maybe 1 or 2 people in 100 years or so. Yeah, I'm not really exaggerating, actually. And this actually is the path that many academics go. I was looking the other day, literally at a fellow academic I know, and I like him a lot, et cetera, and he published this obscure volume through University Press that you can literally buy for $800 because, and I'm not making fun of him at all. It's very important in the narrow field. And he has that quote academic immortality and has made real contributions in a very narrow field that most people have never heard about whatsoever.
But Robert, they must have observed who they were giving this advice to. You had your pith helmet, your long hair. You obviously
I wasn't going to take it.
Yeah, you were different, and you were tenacious.
That's
they
true.
That's probably why they were warning you.
I
this
think
guy
so.
might get a little out of control.
Yeah. I probably thought. I think you're absolutely right. And I actually wasn't thinking about it in those terms because a lot of my fellow academics in my own generation did not need to be given that advice because it sort of came naturally to them. They just did what they did. And, there were a couple of times in my life when I did things that I guess because I am who I am. So I'll give you 2 quick examples. Well, one I just gave, that I didn't go that narrow route in academia and become the specialist. And, one of the things that I really love and are loved because I don't work super actively now were Eocene mammals and Eocene mammals of certain groups, et cetera, et cetera. They lived 45 million years ago. And I could have just been absolute specialist in certain fossil mammals from certain formations out west where they're commonly found. I was actually offered a job. I won't go into details at a university not on the East Coast where, but one of the conditions was that I would restrict my research to this very narrow field because in fact the fossils were around the university, so they wanted someone that would work on that. So that was one thing, and it just wasn't my style. The other story I was going to give very briefly is when I was an undergraduate. I graduated with a BS, Bachelor of Science in Geology, and a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, 2 different degrees, not to brag, but just the way I did it. Right. And so this is 1979. And what's going on? Think about Saudi Arabia and Aramco and oil companies and whatnot. And my wife actually grew up in Saudi Arabia, part of her life. But I didn't know Katie back then. I mean, I met her decades later. But one thing they were courting, and I was courted as a new Bachelor of Science in Geology, is the oil companies and Aramco, etc. And that just did not appeal to me. I would have been making more money in $79 than I've ever made in my life. So then if you convert it to current dollars. I mean, I could have been a quote wealthy man, but you also had to be a company person. You had to do what they wanted you to do. You had to study what they wanted you to study. They offered to train you further, et cetera, all at their expense and pay you really well. But you also had to go to wherever they wanted to station you. It just didn't appeal to me. So I just opted out of that, and I didn't know what to do with my life. And a friend of a friend says, "Oh, why don't you think about just going to Yale and then you can figure it out?" So I said, "Okay, I'll just go to Yale and get a PhD there." I was so naive. I didn't even bother to apply anywhere else. I said, I sent my application. I didn't know what I was going to do if they didn't accept me.
Now, I'm wearing. I wore this for you tonight. My
What's that?
Nazca. It's
Oh
the
yeah,
Nazca.
the Nazca monkey.
Now, and the reason why we may touch on Nazca in Peru, but what is more fascinating to me, in general, about the subject is that the world is getting smarter. Okay, we're getting smarter. That's just it. And the things that we have been taught, the search for the missing link and the basic origins of civilization, don't seem to fit anymore. And we're starting to understand that, where we're backing up going, okay, what part of this is true? And that is your focus now, and you're chasing the evidence here.
Yeah, exactly.
How as far as anthropology goes, if we back up 200,000 years to the origin of Homo sapiens sapien, there isn't anything in the fossil record. If we go with Darwin's, proposals on this, where it's tens of millions of years of evolution to get, and we just appeared, right? This thing, our the beauty, the handsomeness of Homo sapiens sapien just seemed to appear one day, and that's not jiving with a lot of the historical record versus. And where does academia sit on this right now?
Yeah, well, this gets into the problem of the fossil record and how much that we have of the fossil record. I'm not sure we're getting smarter and smarter collectively. We have more and more data, and how do you sort out that data, and how do you sort out the information and misinformation? And I'm not talking just in general. I'm talking within academia also. And how do you decide what is useful, how do you interpret it, etc. So there's a lot of problems here. When you're talking about human evolution, you're really talking about a pittance of evidence. We just don't have that much evidence. I mean, yes, we've got a bunch of fossils of different forms. How you identify them, how you catalog them, how you classify them is incredible turmoil now. In academia. A lot of them are very scrappy. A lot of them, when I say scrappy, they're just not very complete. And you then have all kinds of biases and misconceptions. This is me speaking now. Biases and misconceptions in academia, much less in the general public, as to how you interpret them, how, it's hard right now to even know what Homo sapiens is, or Homo sapiens sapiens. The whole business of you have a little jaw fragment, or you have a little fragment of a skull, a cranium, that type of thing. And people will argue vehemently over what species it is. There's also I may be digressing a little bit, but for instance, when people find a new hominid or hominin species, something in the family or subfamily of humans, there's this incredible propensity on the part of some researchers to name it a new species. And so you see that happening all the time, versus other people want to say it's ancestral to us. So it gets to be a really complicated mess based on very few specimens. And we really, as you say, don't know the origin ultimately of our species. And it gets to be even more problematic that in the fossil record, it's conceptually, theoretically, very, very, very difficult to tell where species, where lineages begin and end, what is just a side branch versus something that, in the case of humans, we actually came from. There are so many side branches, something that people don't realize, most average people don't realize, that is within mammals and within vertebrates, much less other organisms, but with mammals in particular, usually you have numerous different species alive at any time that are all very closely related. So you can think about, just as an everyday example, cats. We have lions and we have tigers and we have cheetahs, we have bobcats, we have domestic cats. Am I making sense?
Mhm.
And they're all very, very closely related. Now, come to humans. We have one species of human right now. That was not the case. That is not actually, that is when it's not was not the case for most of the last 100 to 200,000 years, much less 2 million years if you look at ancestral species, things that are related to humans, etc. So all you have to do is go back to the end of the last ice age or into the last ice age, and you have several, definitively, in my assessment, based on the evidence, definitively several different species minimally. So you have Homo sapiens, as we were just mentioning, Homo sapiens sapiens. We can even go down to the subspecies. You have Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis. You have what are known as the hobbits, Homo floresiensis. You have probably straggling Homo ergaster or Homo, people will use different names for it, Homo erectus type forms. So even going back a few tens of thousands of years, there's very good evidence that we had multiple human species on Earth, and we only have one today. And those species may have been interbreeding to a certain extent. There's evidence for that. Some of them were very distinct and probably could not interbreed. So in a way, it's a real mess.
Well, and even
figure out what's going on and unravel all of this, and
right.
try to oversimplify it. I often tell my students, if someone has a definitive answer for some of these things, and this is the way it was, and that's straight, they don't really know the evidence. They don't really know the subtleties and how complex it is. I don't know.
Even the Denisovan, that's a relatively brand new discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Right? We're discovering new species and new varieties, if you want to call it that. Again, people argue about whether they're distinct species or not. But Denisovans is a good example, probably somehow related to Neanderthals, but also to sapiens, and there's evidence of sapiens and Neanderthals interbreeding, but that doesn't mean they weren't distinct also, versus something like the so-called hobbits, Homo floresiensis, which was probably totally distinct and a branch that had the lineage between sapiens and Homo floresiensis probably goes back much, much further to a common ancestor there. So there's a lot going on with it. And then on top of that, and something I have studied, I may have formal training is not just paleontology, but the concept of, it's called taphonomy. How do things survive? How much survives? And in a very crude sense, as you go back in time, the amount that survives, it's not linear. It's exponentially going down. So you go back so many years, and you don't have, if you go back certain number of years, you don't have half as much surviving. You have like a tenth as much surviving, and then 100th as much. Am I making sense?
Yes.
So we're talking in a situation where there could be all kinds of things out there that haven't survived. I don't mean to talk too much, but I want to give one example because I think you might like it. And I can't remember if you and I have talked about it before, but metallurgy. Okay, the classic view is that metallurgy arose relatively recently. When I say relatively recently, any serious sense of the last 5, 6, 7,000 years at most. And iron is very recent, but one can make a very good case that, in fact, smelt iron, what we would call not cast iron, but wrought iron, may well have been used for tens of thousands of years. And I mean, that is totally heretical to even suggest such a possibility. But on the other hand, Neanderthals and early sapiens, they were mining, and we have evidence for this, incredible amounts of hematite, the red iron ore, we would call it now. And everyone says, well, what were they doing with all this hematite? And then we have all these stories about, oh, they were painting their faces red, and, they liked it because it was red and it looks like blood, and they were just covering themselves with red, and they were using it as sunscreen. All that might be true, but that still doesn't necessarily account for the incredible, hundreds, thousands of tons or whatever that they were mining over time. And no one wants to admit, a few metallurgists, this is not I'm not the only one suggesting this, and I didn't come up with it initially, so I want to give credit where credit's due. But they could have been mining this hematite not just to use as pigments, which, yes, it is used for pigments, or for sunscreen, which ties in with solar outbursts and whatnot, my own research, but they may have actually been smelting it and making wrought iron instruments, maybe just small instruments, little knives and pins, whatever. But they could have been doing it. It's not that difficult. It's actually, when you talk to metallurgists that really know what they're talking about, you can smelt it at relatively, when I say relatively, 1,000 degrees centigrade or whatnot, but you can get that in fires. They could have done that. They didn't need to get to the point where it actually melted, because you smelt it, then you pound out the impurities, et cetera, and they could have been making iron chisels and iron tools, smelt, what we would call wrought iron tools. And why don't we have them nowadays? And I think the answer would be, if this was occurring, and I frankly have been taken more and more seriously that may have been occurring, why don't we see that evidence nowadays? Well, it's iron. Iron basically rusts away. Number one. Number two, so it rusts away. Number two, if you're going through all the work of making these iron tools or ornaments or whatever, you're not just going to leave them around and drop them all on a regular basis. Archaeologists always sort of assume, oh, they're just going to drop everything all over the place. No, you're going to hold on to it. Number two, but number three, and this gets back to maybe our earlier discussion, if you're trained as an archaeologist to this day, and you're looking at things that are 10,000 or 100,000 years old, you're not looking for evidence of iron tools, not whatsoever. And the evidence you would be looking for, if you were looking for it, would be easily missed. You'd have to really be trained to look for it, because essentially what you would be looking for are little rust stains in the dirt or in the soil. Even if they had buried someone and put iron tools or iron, think of like little iron beads or whatnot, they would all rot away. They would all disappear except for little rust marks essentially in the soil, which, with your average, I'm trained as an archaeologist, you would just brush away. You're not looking for it. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find something that's so subtle. Am I making sense? So,
no, what you're sounding like is that you're tenured. You don't care. Oh, man.
This is really heretical. This is radical. And I'm not.
It is.
I'm not trying to say that they were absolutely making iron tools, etc. But the fact that we don't even consider the possibility and even think about looking for evidence that might suggest that, I think, is a big problem, especially when it might well be the case. I'll give you a related example. When I was an undergraduate and graduate student back in the late 70s, early 80s, they had the whole business of the Clovis people, which, maybe a lot of your listeners have heard of. And the Clovis people were supposed to be the first people who entered North America not that long ago. It was at the very end of the last ice age. And I was literally taught that when you're doing archaeological excavation, you hit the Clovis layer. And once you hit the Clovis layer, you go, you excavate down and you hit the Clovis layer, if you're lucky and get back that far in time. And then you finish excavating the Clovis layer and you stop. Why? Because everyone knows no one was in North America earlier than the Clovis people. So why would you waste your time and energy and money and make a fool of yourself looking for something that doesn't exist? And since then, we have found that people entered North America tens of thousands of years before the Clovis people.
Robert, let's stay right there for a second, because everything is connected. So when you redate the Sphinx, now we're not going to talk about that, but when you did that, you were told, and academia, all those professionals started to say the same thing. We don't need to get into this in depth, but it's all related. They said 3000 BC is it. There's nothing to discuss before 3000 BC. We've got Mesopotamia, we've got Giza, and there's nothing else out there. Well, certainly things have changed since then. But if we are pushing back things like the Sphinx and Göbekli Tepe, 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago, then it's a highly developed civilization that is doing these things. And they were taught from somebody else how to get this stuff done. And so metallurgy going back that far isn't out of the question. And at Karahunj in Armenia, they have evidence of metallurgy there on site that goes back to 8,000 BC. But nobody wants to have that nobody wants to have that discussion.
Exactly. And certainly no one wants to consider in academia that metallurgy may go back tens of thousands of years. That the Neanderthals, there's a lot of evidence the Neanderthals were not quite as dumb as a lot of people want to make them out to be.
They had big brains. They had big brains, man.
Yeah, they had much bigger brains than us. And Göbekli Tepe, when most people, when they talk about Göbekli Tepe, and I love Göbekli Tepe because, in part, as you pointed out, it actually confirmed what I was saying before it was ever discovered. Right. Because I was asked, well, this is impossible. Civilization doesn't go back more than about 5,000, 6,000 years at the most. I heard that over and over again. Then Göbekli Tepe is discovered, which is a good 12,000 plus years for the oldest portions of it. And beautiful stone pillars and the megaliths and that type of thing. But in some ways, even more astounding to me as a geologist, because I know the stones, etc., are these little teeny, and I don't have one in my hand, but I'm trying to show it, little teeny beads made out of beautiful hard stones that have little holes drilled there lengthwise through them that are on the order of a millimeter in diameter. And they're trying to tell us that somehow they did that without any kind of metallurgy or, I guess they're trying to use, the
chicken bones, chicken bones.
Chicken bone with some quartz grains or something on the end of it, and they're twirling that down. I don't believe for a second. And again, this ties in. If they had, simple wrought iron needles and that type of thing, it would sure have made their life a whole lot easier. But we're not going to find that if they've rusted away and no one's looking for the rust stains that might demonstrate such was the case. So yeah, I don't know. Why you get me into these conversations that are really going to get me in trouble.
It's my job, Robert. But I remember I'm gonna just bring up Jaws this one time, and I miss that guy dearly.
Just for those who don't know,
John Anthony West. So I'm at the Met. Okay, I'm at the Met, and I'm going through the Egypt wing, which is what, half of the museum, right? So I'm going through the Egypt wing, and they have this rose granite red stela. It's about this wide, maybe 3 feet tall, and it's sitting there. And Robert, I know you've seen this stela, but this display. But anyway, I'm looking at it, and the hieroglyphs were like a 1/4 inch deep, and they were very tiny, and there was 10,000, right? And really deep, and very clean and very precise. And at the bottom of the display, they have this copper, I swear I'm not making, they have a copper needle, and it's about this long, and like a sewing needle. And I'm reading the thing, and it says this stela was carved with this copper tool. And I'm looking at the stela, and it's and I'm looking at and I called up John. Man, I'm at the Met. Yeah, I'm looking at this stela. Yeah, and we just laughed. There was no way that was carved with that, but that's the dogma.
That's the dogma, and actually, that's the dogma, and I could comment on that further if you don't mind. Because some of the it's interesting, some of the very early Egyptologists suggested, or they basically accepted, that the ancient Egyptians at that time had iron tools. And that now, of course, is not accepted. It's supposed to be just copper and bronze and that type of thing. And I forget who it was, but one of the early Egyptologists, he actually commissioned a modern Egyptian at the time to use iron, not steel, just actually wrought iron that I was talking about, chisels to carve a reproduction of a statue, or carved statue, stela, something along that line, along the lines. And he actually documented that this modern Egyptian, so this is 100 or more years ago, the modern Egyptian was using these chisels of wrought iron, which he would use the chisels to cut it, but wrought iron is not as hard as, finished modern steel tools. So he would use them, and if I remember correctly, he had like 40 of them or so, and he would use them. He would use each one just a little while, then give it to his assistant, who would take it back to the fire to recongeal it, or whatever you call, and harden it again. And he did that, and he did it very efficiently with these iron tools, and absolutely amazed this early Egyptologist, who was convinced that this must be what they were doing, and that they had these tools available to them at a much earlier date than any modern Egyptologist would even consider. So
what I know you thought about this, so I'm going to ask you, what would freak out the world and academia more? To find out that aliens are visiting Earth and we're in contact, or that there was another civilization in deep history, high technology, that predated us? What would freak out? What would be the bigger freak out?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, Göbekli Tepe is already, they want to dismiss that. I mean, when you look at something like, I'm going to get to your question, but when you look at something like Göbekli Tepe, I am amazed at how a lot of my academic colleagues want to dumb it down. I mean, Göbekli Tepe, to me, is very much the tip of the proverbial iceberg. You don't build a structure like that without having, I contend that they were probably literate, based on studies of just what we have available, and also just logically, how do you organize, how do you build that type of thing without having some kind of ability to record and pass instructions around, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, again, the crude analogy is, what will people think of us 12,000 years from now? And how will they misinterpret the few remains that may survive? But going back in time, I mean, going into deeper history, there could easily, I shouldn't say easily, but I don't think it's inconceivable at all that there was quite sophisticated, what I call cycles of civilization at a much earlier period that were decimated. We have
Okay, so now answer the question.
Answer the question. I don't know what, I think it really depends on the particular academic, the particular person, if they would be more freaked out by incredibly sophisticated, let's say, even a sophistication at the level we'll call it Roman Empire, much less what we have now with electronics, that type of thing. If we found even a Roman Empire sophistication 100,000 years ago, I think that would totally freak them out, because it would throw into disarray the whole concept, which you were alluding to before, of Darwinian style progress, that we rose up, that we are the greatest thing that ever was on Earth, etc., etc. That, I think, would really freak out a lot of academics. I think that it would be less freaky, should we say, for some of the academics if all of a sudden tomorrow we find out, or the ETs land and make themselves known to us. At least, that's sort of been coming, that we can't be
right.
Now the third, and I think you were saying this, what if the ETs landed 100,000 or a million years ago and altered us or whatever, or introduced us to civilization? So now we have the worst of both. Not only do we have advanced civilization 100,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago, pick your number, but it was brought here by ET, so now you're hitting both, and you're really going to freak everyone
out. Tomorrow you're getting called into the dean's office. I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting you know. But can we stay there? Let's stay there. Let's stay right there for a second, and I'll tell you why. If we push this back and we continue to push it back, the problem that we have now is that we evolved from monkeys, that we evolved from primates, right? Well, okay. In a general sense, but then why are there still monkeys? Right?
No.
That's the problem that I have. What I mean is, it seems that we are the only one evolving by leaps and bounds. Right. And everything else is just consistent and static. They're, evolving in their own ways, small increments, but monkeys are still monkeys. And we evolved very, very fast. If the universe is 13.8 billion years old, even that now is in debate.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but if we look at that, Homo sapiens sapien is like a layer of paint at the end of the linear time scale, right? We're like but we evolved so quickly. But yet all the other species and subspecies are static. That's the part that my brain just won't accept.
Yeah, but okay, and I think that's a really good point, and there's no good answer for that. And that's why, for instance, and I apologize, forget the authors' names, but the whole concept of the Silurian hypothesis, I'm sure you've heard of that, could there have been Silurian, we're talking 400 plus million years ago, could there have been advanced technology and civilization back then that we have no evidence of, other than maybe trying to look for, chemical layers and that type of thing. I mean, 400 million years from now, what's going to survive of us? The main thing that will probably survive, and I'm not being facetious here, are things like nanoplastics and waste, radioactive waste, that type of thing. That's the whole concept of the Anthropocene, that we have now created geologically a signature in the what will become the geologic record hundreds of millions of years from now. And it's not a nice signature. It's basically waste and pollution, that type of thing. So yeah, we have create a situation, and this gets back to something I was saying before, that even a few tens of thousands of years ago, there was more than one species of, quote, human or humanoid type organisms on Earth, and we've caused them to go extinct. And we're causing, you mentioned monkeys and apes and whatnot, we're causing them to go extinct really quickly too. We're causing a whole lot of things to go extinct, humans. And I don't want to sound too environmentally oriented, but I am an author on environmental science textbook and have an interest in that. And we are driving a lot of things to extinction. Where there's too many people on Earth. That's probably controversial too, but I believe that absolutely we are way beyond carrying capacity. And could this have happened before? And I think we as humans have incredible hubris, and we could be brought down very, very, very quickly. And you and I have talked about this before. I'm convinced that our modern society, our modern technology is incredibly vulnerable to natural events, and both internal, or I should both say both Earth-based events like earthquakes and volcanoes and that type of thing, but also solar events and galactic events. And are we just repeating what's happened before hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago?
As a geologist slash anthropologist slash paleontologist slash archaeologist,
yeah,
when you go around that's a lot of big letters after your name. When you go around the world, and I'm fortunate to have done this too, when you go around the world and you see the repeating of unaccountable megalithic, right? Unaccountable, where the local cultures and they're like, I don't know, we it was here when we got here. And you hear this story repeated over and over again. But when you go to a site like the Assarian, which to me just doesn't fit, it doesn't compute. Or Ollantay Tambo, right? Sacsayhuaman. You go to these sites and you're just like, wait a minute. No. And I think that is the strongest evidence that we have of cultures that had it together. They had farming, they had a judicial system, you know what I mean? They had a government. They were fully upright, functioning civilizations, but nobody's got a collective memory of who they were. And it's repeated all around the world, isn't it?
I think this is repeated on a regular basis, and they're forgotten. And that's why I call it one of my books, Forgotten Civilization, the book that people should read if they're going to read one of my books. They're forgotten. They're literally forgotten. They're not lost. They're forgotten. They're literally forgotten. And it's also very interesting. This ties in with something, recent work, and I want to give Katie a lot of credit here. You mentioned some of these sites like the Assarian in Egypt, or I think of Saqqara, where you have, incredible
the Serapeum.
The Serapeum, thank you. The Serapeum at Saqqara, which you probably were there just recently, I think. And it's just incredible. And you've got this incredible stonework and in the Serapeum, for those that don't know it, what some people call sarcophagi, but they're big stone boxes, granite boxes that weigh hundreds of tons, etc. And how were they moved around? How were they machined and manufactured? What was their purpose? Were they really just to hold the bulls, the sacred Apis bulls, which is what they were? There's evidence they were used for that in what I think of as modern times, although it's several thousand years ago in dynastic Egypt. But a lot of these sites, do they go back to a much earlier period? And that gets into something that Katie has pointed out to me, and we're working on now, that there's a lot of evidence that some of these sites are actually inheritance from a much earlier period. And it goes back to a much earlier time, and they were literally packed with mud bricks and stones and that type of thing to preserve them, maybe as a legacy. And it's interesting that Göbekli Tepe, to come back to Göbekli Tepe, something that was pointed out by the late Klaus Schmidt, who excavated Göbekli Tepe. He was with the German Archaeological Institute until his untimely premature death. He was excavating. He pointed out that it was intentionally buried. It was intentionally buried at the end of the last ice age. So they were, because there was huge calamities at that time based on my work, solar outbursts and ending the last ice age, but it was intentionally buried. Whether they meant to come back to it or they did for posterity, etc., we don't know. But there's lots of evidence, and Katie in particular has pointed this out to me when we were traveling through Egypt, that a lot of the sites in Egypt appear to have been intentionally buried also. So could they go back to that earlier period as well? For people who are interested in this, they should go to my website, because there's actually some articles posted talking about this. But could this be part of earlier cycles of civilization that have not been recognized because they were reused during later periods? And this goes back to my early work on the Sphinx, that the Sphinx was certainly known in dynastic times. It was used in dynastic times. It was refurbished and restored in dynastic times, but that's not where it originated. It originated at a much, much earlier period. I date the origins well back, back to the end of the last ice age. So we may be missing a lot of the evidence because we end up putting it into this conceptual framework that historians and archaeologists and Egyptologists have always accepted, and they don't think that, well, maybe some of this could go back to an earlier period and was simply reused later.
Can I touch upon one thing? And the audience really needs to hear this. Okay. The version of Egypt that we are taught started with Napoleon. And I'm going to give Napoleon credit where credit's due. He went to invade Egypt, but he took a bunch of scientists with him and artists, and he documented things. But since then, that's modern history, man. It's 200 years. And so for the last 200 years, we've got the British version of events that were established in 1800. We have Napoleon's version of events, and Egyptology was born then. It hasn't changed much. We are still, our basis of understanding is a 200-year-old concept. And that's the part where when you go to the Great Sphinx, and I want to drive this home, you stand there and you stand in the Sphinx chamber and you look around and you tell me that is the same age as the Great Pyramid. It's not. It's not. It's a completely different millennia. It's a completely different. You can see it. But the Napoleon, when he got there, it was still buried. You need to understand all of that. It's
and it's interesting. Some of the very early Egyptologists, they just assumed that the Sphinx was older than the pyramids, because it sort of looks it. I mean, as you said, it looks it. And the other thing, and I know we've talked about this before, but maybe some people haven't heard this who are watching it at the moment, because you and I assume a lot of things, perhaps, that not everyone has heard all of this. The head of the Sphinx is not the original head. It's been recarved. It was recarved in dynastic times. I am absolutely 100% certain of that. And one of the first things that hit me when I first went there, and that was 1990, with John Anthony West, one of the first things that hit me was the head of the Sphinx is out of proportion to to
It's so tiny.
it's
So
tiny compared to
when
the
you
body.
back up, listen, when you back up, you go out up to the next quarry, and you turn around and you look at the Sphinx. It's not what you see in pictures.
Exactly.
That head is this big, man. It's no,
Yeah,
and it looks different in pictures when you see it in person.
Oh, that's the thing. And that's why I say to many people, and you know this well personally, you have to see these sites for yourself before you start judging them. Because pictures, and I sound maybe silly, but pictures can be very deceiving. They really can be. And yeah, the head is much too small for the body because it's not the original head. It's a dynastic head. When I first came out with the origins of the Sphinx going back to such a remote period, I had all these crazy Egyptologists. I don't mean to offend them, but they were saying, "Oh, look, how can you say that? You're crazy. It's a head. The head is clearly a pharaonic dynastic period head." Well, yeah, it is.
Yes, it is.
It's not the original head. Look at the proportions. Can't you see? It's a little bit small for the body. Because it was clear to me initially, and I mean, I'm talking the first few minutes I was there, that it was a much bigger head and it weathered down. And it's really hard to repair a head when it's all weathered down. So they just recarved it smaller. When you look at the paws and the body, there you can see the repair blocks where they repaired it by trying to put blocks in to the crevices and the weathered areas. That's what you expect, but it's a much older structure.
A couple of things before we hit the break here, and we'll do that in a few minutes.
Oh, I'll break like
yeah.
I was thinking of another type of break initially.
There's some recent news out of Egypt. So when I was there last year, I'll be back there in a couple of months. But when I was there back in October, I'm at the Assarian, and they took me up. The director of the site takes me up and shows me this dig that they're doing, and it's about a mile away. Didn't take me over; it's too far anyway. And I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "We found another Assarian."
Yeah,
I was like, "What?" Right. And now, since then, they found a third. And just when there's not supposed to be anything new, right, in Egypt, a new Assarian, that's crazy. And then last week, the breaking news that they found 2 underground chambers on the Giza Plateau. When, again, there's nothing to be discovered. And now we found 2 underground ginormous chambers right there on the plateau.
Yeah. So I think we should, may I say, for those that don't know what the Assarian is, it's the so-called Tomb of Osiris or whatever, and it's at Abydos. This is the one we're talking about, right, Jimmy?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's at Abydos at the Temple of Seti, and it's sort of in the back of the temple. And the point of one of the important points is that it's made out of these huge granite blocks. They're really well engineered, very different in style and technology than the rest of the temple, and it's at a much lower level, which says everything says it's a really ancient structure, and it's most comparable in many ways, in my assessment at least, to the so-called Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple, but especially the Valley Temple at Giza, which are also the same age as the origins of the Sphinx, because they built those temples when they carved out blocks to carve the body of the Sphinx. So To me, the Assarian, and I've said this for a very long time, decades, seems to be another relic from that very, very early period. And it's not just any relic. I mean, it is incredibly sophisticated, incredible, huge blocks that are, just
the size of a house. Those
how do you
blocks
move those? How do you move those?
Yeah.
And they're not just sitting out in the open. They're sitting down in what looks like a pit or a ditch or a hole. But I think that's because the silt and sediment has filled up around them over thousands and tens of thousands.
You can see the layers. You're a geologist, man. You can see the layers. So exactly. you look over and you're like, you look up at Seti the First, right? You're looking, and then you look down into the Assarian, and you can see you're like, no,
yeah, exactly.
These time scales don't match.
That's why I wanted people to understand that who haven't actually been there don't know what we're talking about. And this is my crude way of saying it. I think that the dynastic Egyptians or whoever built the Seti, the first temple, which may well go back to an earlier period too, and then Seti adopted, etc. They saw this as we'll call it sacred site, and they knew it was a sacred site, etc. They're building this, and then when they're building it and doing excavation for the foundation, whatnot of their site, they hit this older structure, which was already there, but there thousands and thousands and thousands of years earlier, which is now what we call the Assarian. And I suspect they recognized it as a very sacred, ancient structure at a time that we think of as ancient, the time
right.
I mean, we're talking thousands of years separate us from them, and they recognize this was something that was thousands of years earlier than them.
When I go down, Robert, I'm not kidding. I don't want to use a bad word. Okay, I respect you a lot, and respect my audience, but sometimes I just got to speak truth. You walk down into the Assarian, which I have and you have, and you stand and you look up at those blocks, right? And there's 2 rows of them, and they are, I don't know the dimensions, but I don't know, 15 feet wide, 25 feet tall, square.
Like
that. Okay, that's huge. And you look, and all you go is, this is bullshit. Somebody's lying. How did this get here? I mean, they're just as big as a house,
Exactly.
And they're just beautiful, and they had a friggin' roof.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's that one structure. I mean, is just mind-boggling. Much less, it's just one thing in Egypt. There's so much mind-boggling.
Now they have 3 of them.
Yeah,
somebody's got some splaining to do.
Yeah,
let's take Robert. Let's get our break in, because if we don't, you and I are going to do this all night long. So let's get the break in. Our guest tonight, the one and only Dr. Robert Schoch. This is Fade to Black. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 t-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black t-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture. Send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black t-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping. And you're going to get a tracking number. And with the Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Göbekli Tepe. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. That's right. Tomorrow, the dean's office. Yeah. Robert's going to get called in. They're going to go, hey, Robert, come on in. Take a seat. How you doing? Okay,
Oh, you gave me
so
trouble once again.
so one of the more controversial aspects when it comes to anthropology and human civilization, no question that's difficult to answer, and it's this: Homo sapiens sapien, 46 chromosomes. Primates, 48.
Well,
That I have a problem with. And if there is a connection there, then how did we lose 2 chromosome pairs? How did that happen? And why aren't primates the ones building the internet? There's a lot of information in 2 chromosomes.
yeah, and I mean, you have males that have only a part of a chromosome, whereas females have, the 2 X's, and males have X and Y. But females have more information. So why aren't they dominating?
You're only saying that because Katie's right there and she's listening. But
no, I mean, it actually is interesting that
it's a very important question. It's a very important question. It seems like somebody did the snip some, in our distant past.
No, I don't have an answer for that. I'll admit that I don't have an answer, so I don't know.
Yeah, and when I ask the professionals, an anthropologist, and
I'm not a
and they will always say, well, stuff happens. Well, that's not a good answer. Right? That's a pretty significant difference.
Yeah,
when you go.
It is interesting that a lot of plants, they can double or quadruple their number of chromosomes. A lot of domestic plants have very disparate numbers of chromosomes compared to their wild progenitors, etc. So yeah, stuff does happen at a genetic level, but that's not a very satisfying answer. And why does it happen? Again, I don't want to go there, but maybe you do. Was there some manipulation specifically? I mean, I'm sure you're. Isn't that like, not to go the easy path here, Occam's razor, right? The simplest answer. And sometimes an answer as crazy as that sounds is like maybe the most simplest answer. Yeah, but the Occam's razor can get misused also, because some things are not always as simple as they sound, and you have to take everything into account. I mean, Occam's razor is very useful theoretical concept. If you have a lot of different hypotheses, you have a lot of different ways of looking at something, well, which path do you go? The simplest explanation doesn't demonstrate that the simplest explanation is necessarily the correct explanation. It's not even almost, I would say Occam's razor in a way is an aesthetic thing, that the simplest is the way to go if you have more than one explanation that will equally explain everything. What I have problems with, and this gets back to some of the things we were talking about, some of my colleagues, academic colleagues, they will just dismiss certain things, whether it's earlier cycles of civilization or natural events interfering with human events, human history, or I don't even want to go with ETs, and they will use Occam's razor to say, well, that's too complicated. We have to have a much simpler explanation. But a lot of times when they're, quote, using Occam's razor, at the same time, they're throwing out evidence that they frankly just don't want to face. So they're saying, oh, Occam's razor is fine, and this is the explanation, and then I'll come back. But there's X, Y, and Z evidence you're not even accounting for with your, quote, Occam's razor simple explanation. Am I making some sense to you, Jimmy?
Yeah, well, and the reason for that...
But way that they can just get rid of things. I got to say one more thing. Can I say one more thing?
It's your show. I'm just the guest.
I absolutely detest, I'll use that term, when people say to me, and this is a Carl Sagan thing, although he did not originate it, that extraordinary, what does he say? Extraordinary hypotheses require extraordinary evidence or something like that. And he would
Close.
use it to dismiss, I'm paraphrasing. Did I get it right? Something along
It's
those lines.
close. It's close.
Yeah. What do you know exactly how he said it? Do you remember?
Let's stay right there, though. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah, okay. He used claims, maybe.
I think so.
That to me is absolutely total nonsense. Evidence is evidence, whether you consider that evidence extraordinary or not. And it sets up a situation where the quote skeptic who wants to maintain the status quo, they're the ones that determine what is a extraordinary claim, what is an extraordinary claim for them and what is not, and what is the quote extraordinary evidence that they're arguing has to be there. No, if it's evidence, it's evidence. It doesn't need to be quote extraordinary by their subjective judgment. And I don't know if I'm making sense to you in the audience, but that just becomes a subjective, nonsensical statement that sounds good to a lot of people, and then they just monkey it, to use that term, since we were talking about monkey it, they parrot it, if you want to use avian term, and everyone, oh yeah, and you just throw out this cliche, sounds good, but really try to analyze it, it makes no sense whatsoever. You don't just throw out evidence because it's not extraordinary enough to suit you to overchange your little God-given, I guess, or culturally given, I should really say, paradigm and worldview that you don't want to part with. No, if there's evidence, let's look at the evidence, whether it's quote extraordinary or not. I was on that metallurgy thing before the break. Okay, so we find little rust stains. That may not seem like very extraordinary evidence, but it may have incredible implications.
Well, okay.
So you get me to do that sometimes. It's your fault.
I love it, and I'm going to do it again right now. The elephant in the room that nobody wants to discuss, besides consciousness, the elephant in the room that nobody wants to discuss is the fact that Homo sapien sapien just appeared. Okay, just appeared. Just 200,000 years ago, right? And nobody wants to discuss how, why, and the implications of that. That they know that's a dangerous zone, and nobody wants to go there. But we just appeared, and took over at the same time.
And there's no good reason that anyone I've ever heard suggest as to why, at least in terms of, you had the same conditions on Earth for millions of years. Why didn't they arise before? I remember when I was a graduate student, there were very, serious suggestions that dinosaurs, especially bipedal dinosaurs, if things had gone just a little bit differently, they could have developed what we would call technology and civilization, etc. They had large brains, they had arms and hands,
opposing thumbs.
Why didn't they develop culture like we think of it? Why didn't they develop technology? Why didn't they develop civilization? Or did they? But I won't go there. And why did it just appear in the last couple of 100,000 years, the last literally tens of thousands of years? It doesn't actually make a lot of logical sense. What was it that caused this to happen? Or are we totally off base, as we were discussing before the break, or alluding to, that it has occurred in the past, but it's been totally decimated, totally wiped out? You're wearing that, Nazca shirt with the monkey. I mean, the Nazca lines, I'm going to digress once more here, are very interesting because I believe, based on the evidence, when I say I believe anything, it's always based on the evidence that we have the real physical evidence that the last cycle of civilization, I call it the Urian. I've actually given it that name, but it includes Göbekli Tepe, it includes the makers, who built the original Sphinx, the origins of the Sphinx. That time, that people goes back to the end of the last ice age, was decimated. I'm convinced it was a very high culture and civilization that was decimated at the end of the last ice age. I believe it was not a comet, but it was solar outburst from the sun that caused, devastation on Earth, wiped out that civilization. Nazca lines may well represent things that people were seeing in the sky. And it's even possible Nazca lines were literally branded on Earth and then they were chalked and they were walked later. This is something Katie and I have been talking about, that you have vitrified glass, etc. Release reports of it from that area, which is what you would get from a solar outburst. So this gets very controversial. But my point is that events like this could totally wipe out very advanced civilization. We now have more and more evidence that these are recurring themes in geological history, and they could be affecting humanity. Something that I always found astounding when I was an undergraduate, even because I was studying both geology and anthropology and archaeology simultaneously, is that the archaeologists consistently ignored any kind of natural events. It's somehow humanity just did its thing in a Darwinian progressional way, independent of what was happening on Earth otherwise, independent of natural events. They were very, very seldom what they even admit that natural events could in any way influence the direction of the development of humanity. It was all just this one-way progress. And again, it sort of, I don't know, it seems to hurt certain archaeologists' feelings to think that the earlier civilizations could in any way be even close to advanced as we are. I've literally met Egyptologists, you and I both know Egypt, and how incredible it is, who they spend their careers, they spend their lives, they devote their time to studying Egyptology and the ancient Egyptians. And I've had them say to me, yeah, they're sort of interesting and whatnot, but weren't they sort of stupid and primitive? Yeah, they created a little bit of nice artwork here and there, but they were really stupid, primitive people, worshiping these gods with human bodies and animal heads and whatnot. And to me, they've missed the entire concept of what ancient Egypt really was about, and how sophisticated it was. And to me, they're just studying ancient Egypt essentially in a crude sense to make fun of it and build themselves up about how much better we are than they were back then, thousands of years ago.
When you take that idea a step further and you realize that we are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to Narmer.
Oh,
by 1,000 years.
Absolutely.
That's how old Egypt is.
Egypt is. For those that don't know, because I don't want to assume I don't mean this in any bad way to the audience, but Cleopatra, you're talking a little over 2,000 years ago. Narmer, who was one of the people who unified Upper and Lower Egypt into dynastic Egypt, you're talking 3,000 plus years earlier than Cleopatra. So yeah, he's more than twice as old. So to Cleopatra, he's 1,000 plus years older than Cleopatra is to us. And that also brings up the point that when you look at Narmer period Egypt and artifacts from that time, they look Egyptian, even to the untrained eye. And you look at Ptolemaic, that is the last end of
Greece,
basically ancient Egypt. Yeah, when
Cleopatra, right?
Cleopatra was the last Ptolemy of Egypt. The Ptolemy was a general who inherited Egypt when Alexander the Great died, basically. And so they ruled Egypt for a good 300 plus years, or about 300, well, just about 300 years. And it looks Egyptian. So when you have Ptolemaic carvings, they look Egyptian. When you have Narmer period carvings over 3,000 years or earlier, they look Egyptian. I mean, there's this incredible continuity there for 3,000 plus years. And I push it back even further with the origins of the Sphinx, etc. We can't talk about that today. I mean, America's what, a couple hundred, 1776. We're nothing. We're a blink of the eye. Even all of Europe is a blink of the eye compared to.
Let me ask you a question. I want to make sure you're in the dean's office tomorrow. So, is this if we really take a hard look at this and an understanding of Göbekli Tepe in a general sense, and you look at Klaus Schmidt's statements that have been since scientifically verified, has become fact. I'm talking about carbon dating and the backfill and the garbage, okay?
Yeah.
If that is the case, and with your and Katie's research into the possibility of a cosmic event, it would seem to me, Robert, that ancient Stone Age culture knew in advance of a cosmic event that was forthcoming, and they needed to fill in Göbekli Tepe and preserve it because of this event. And everything at 10,500 BC lines up with cultures around the world. How is it possible, if we go with the dogma, the Orthodox academia, that was Stone Age man? How would Stone Age man possibly have knowledge of a forthcoming cosmic event? Explain that to me.
Okay, no. If you're going with the current dogma, the current academic conventional status quo paradigm, they could not know it. I think, again, the short answer for me is that these were much more sophisticated, culturally, philosophically, however you want to put it, but scientifically, than they're given credit for. And I think that something I have found with ancient societies around the world that I've studied for the last 30, almost 40 years now, well, about 40 years now, is that they had much longer time frames that they thought about. They were record keeping. I have no doubt personally that the Göbekli Tepe people, the people from that period, had records, they had literacy, etc., that they were recording events. It turns out that I'm convinced, based on the evidence, the physical, geological, and dendrochronological evidence, the ice cores, sediment cores, etc., that we had a turbulent time at the end of the last ice age. In fact, what's known as the Younger Dryas is bounded by major solar events. The beginning of the Younger Dryas, 1,200 years earlier than 9,700 BCE, so about 10,900 BCE. A lot of people, that's a time when a lot of people thought a comet hit, etc. I'm convinced it was not a comet. I think it was a solar event, which would give many of the same signatures. In fact, it would give all the same signatures as a presumed cometary event, but it would also give other evidence that you can't explain with a comet, and that includes configurations in the sky that seem to be, I'm convinced, were recorded as petroglyphs, that were recorded and passed down as what's known as the Rongo script in Easter Island, which actually Katie first put together, was recorded in things that look like what is on the Nazca Plain and on your shirt from the Nazca Plain, etc. So I think there's a lot of things that go back to the end of the last ice age, and not just the last few centuries, but the last several millennia of the end of the last ice age. And they were observing, they knew what was going on. And to put it in modern terms, which maybe makes it sound very sophisticated, but it is very sophisticated, they had a concept of probably cosmic plasma physics, if I could put it that way, of what was happening in the sky, what was happening in the sun. It is an incredible myth that is only now being broken, I think, by modern science, that the sun is this incredibly stable thing in the sky that just rises and sets and we don't need to worry about whatsoever. In fact, it goes through periods of what we can call, from a physics point of view or astrophysics point of view, disequilibrium. It goes through periods of disequilibrium, seem to have a cycle, I'm convinced, of on the order of 12, 13,000 years, where it goes through periods for several millennia, several thousand years, where it's fairly unstable, undergoing all kinds of major solar outbursts and flares and what are known as coronal mass ejections, solar particle events, etc. They were experiencing this toward the end of the last ice age. I think they were recording what was going on. They knew the signs to look for. I think they were very sophisticated about this. So yeah, they could probably make predictions, and we have evidence that they were doing that, I think. Very much so. Just to give credit where credit's due, Dr. Anthony Peratt, he's now retired, but still alive, at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, first really start putting this together about 20 some years ago, that there was a major solar outburst at that time, that people had recorded this, they had seen it in the sky, they passed down information, legends about it, etc. So, this is not sort of simple, just looking up in the sky and recording the solstices and the equinoxes and making a crude calendar to plant your corn by, or to decide when to go hunting X, Y, and Z animal. It's much more sophisticated than that. And something that is even acknowledged by mainstream archaeologists is that in the last 5,000 years, I think of the Maya in particular, they had incredibly sophisticated calendars. But how do they have sophisticated calendars? From astronomical observations. And they weren't just doing this because they were bored. I think they were doing it for very real reasons, and it meant life and death reasons. I also want to point out, and I'm not a scaremonger, I'm not into that type of thing. I'm not a prepper or anything like that. But all the best evidence is that our sun is going back into this turbulent period. We even saw that very recently, with the
it was crazy
solar flares and with major aurora being seen at lower latitudes, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that was nothing. That was totally trivial compared to what happened at the end of the last ice age. And it's actually trivial compared to what happened in 1859. The so-called, or what's known as the Carrington event in 1859, which I think we've talked about that before. We had an event like the one in 1859 tomorrow. It's going to wipe out the internet. It's going to wipe out communication systems. I mean, we have set ourselves in such a vulnerable situation, but were there vulnerable civilizations back in previous cycles that, have been forgotten?
If we back all of this up, and
the bottom line is,
well, hold on, Robert, hold on.
Yeah.
This is where I'm going to interrupt my friend Robert Schoch.
Oh, absolutely.
Is this the idea of a nomadic culture being organized enough to construct Göbekli Tepe is wrong, and that's false. And they're trying to push that on us, that we're not giving Stone Age man enough credit. And it's not just Göbekli Tepe. You've got Nabta Playa. right?
Yeah,
I brought up Karahoonj
yeah,
too as
yeah,
well.
sure,
These are
absolutely.
ancient sites that Nabda Playa is 7,000 BC, right?
Or earlier.
And
According
or
to
earlier.
Gracie, parts of it are much earlier than that. You know, you can.
It's a to suggest that these are nomadic cultures and not cultures that were again upright and organized and
Right,
complete
right.
is false.
Oh,
And I just find that they want to think that we're ignorant, and I don't think it's that kind of party anymore.
no, I agree. I mean, they're not just simple, quote, hunter gatherers, or more technically gatherer hunters, since gathering seem to be the prominent. No, they're much beyond that. Uh, they're living in a different culture, a different civilization. That when I say different, different from us. So it's hard sometimes for us to wrap our brains around it, so to speak, because they probably have very different view of things. Very, in my opinion, probably much longer term view. They had different priorities, but they were just as sophisticated, if not more sophisticated in many ways, as we are. And you know, what would we know? Again, you know, I'd like people to think about 12,000 years from now. What will people know, if there's people on Earth, about our culture and our civilization, especially if almost nothing survives in the term of records? Uh, and we're getting to a point where very little is going to survive. Uh, you know, most of what we have now, when I say little survive, records, actual, you know, our insights, our thoughts, etc. It's all electronic. You know, so much is electronic now. That's not going to survive. I mean, even I was thinking about this the other day. You and I are old enough to remember earlier computers
Mm-hmm.
and earlier ways of recording information, what floppy drives, et cetera, et cetera. Even if you have them, they've probably degraded by now. There's no machinery to use for them unless you go to, you know, some specialized person who's kept old computers and old drives, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we're just backing ourselves into a corner. But did they do the same thing? I mean, you know,
Well,
how can you judge
what a great
people by the little that we have from them? The
what a
little.
great point, though. What a great point. When and maybe you were going in this direction. It's such a great point when I hear a skeptic or a debunker bring up, well, it's you're always talking about rocks. You're always talking about stone tablets. You're always it's so easy to flip around. It's just like, that's why we know what we know.
Exactly.
That stuff is preserved.
That's right. All the stuff that was not preserved, that's the very point. Most of it, most of what we know from our civilization will not be preserved. Where that's going to be preserved potentially are the equivalent of a few stone tablets. Literally, you know, some of the memorials that have been carved into stone in the 21st century or 21st century, you know, to fallen soldiers in such and such a war, etc. Maybe parts of those will be preserved, but the rest won't be.
Now, okay, since you're a rock
I don't think things
star,
are going to change, but I'm a geologist.
right. Since
You
you're
know,
a rock
it's going to be
star,
some big stone structures. Even cement
right.
structures aren't going to survive. And cement that is reinforced steel and what concrete and all that, that's, you know, yeah, you'll have some remains of it, but it's all going to be crumbly and a mess.
Okay, since you brought up the fact that you're a geologist, which I didn't know, I just found that out tonight. You're a geologist, really? I just have to ask you, and I know you put your mind to this: the unfinished obelisk at Aswan.
Yeah.
What was the plan? What was the plan? What was the plan? You stand above. I mean, you stand above that thing. It's as big as the Empire State Building, right? And it's just like, what was your plan? I can see what was your plan?
Yeah, I mean, how do you get it out? And when you go there, for those who haven't been there, it's unfinished. And the reason that they say it's unfinished is because it developed a crack, or they found a crack in it. And you have to have, for a genuine obelisk, it has to be one piece of granite. And so this would have been the largest obelisk or whatnot. But when you look at it, how are they carving it? They're not opening up a huge, base, football expanse that they could sort of roll it along or whatnot. They're carving straight down around it, very narrow little space around it. Even if they carve the whole thing, how are they going to get out of there? How are they going to lift it out?
What was the plan? What was the plan? What do you think the plan was?
I don't know. I mean, again, I like to feel that I can admit when I don't know something.
Right.
And I really don't know how they were planning to get that out of the pit that they were carving it from.
That's the one thing.
Really, and you see this around the world. Katie just whispered in my ear. Give her credit. You see the same thing in Easter Island. You see the same thing on Easter Island, a place I love. When they were carving the moai, the giant moai in the quarry there, and how were they getting them out and moving them around? I mean, yeah, the archaeologists have these views, and they do these little demonstrations to show how it was done. But what you often don't see is that off camera it's not quite so successful. I remember one demonstration that archaeologists were trying to do some decades ago of how did they build the pyramids. So they're trying to build a mini pyramid, and what they didn't show is that it was basically a failure trying to use the traditional.
They never got it done. They never got it done.
They had to cheat a little bit with modern equipment. And even that, they were just moving very small blocks that modern equipment can handle. I mean, I don't believe there's any modern equipment that could lift the unfinished obelisk out if it had been finished. Yeah,
I mean, what was the plan? And not only just get it out of the hole, right? Okay, that's crazy.
Erect it.
What size of boat were they planning on putting that in?
Yeah.
How big of a boat displaces 2,500 tons?
Yeah,
that's a big boat, man. That's a big boat. That's a big boat.
On the Nile. So that it isn't dragging on the bottom.
Right. It's a big boat. That's a ship.
Yeah.
So I have huge issues with that where it doesn't make any sense. But yet, what they want to do is, again, like you said, dumb it all down.
Oh, they dumb it down.
Some ropes, couple of wooden, couple of palm trees,
milk, oil, olive oils to drag it along across the sand.
Did you say olive oil?
Dragging an obelisk across. Or when you go to the unfinished obelisk, to this day, at least the last time I was there for the tourists, they have the little diorite balls, and so they have a little display where you can bounce it, and all it can do is convince you this is not how they did it.
That's a lot of olive oil, man. That's a lot of.
Really think about it. But for instance, and again, I love Turkey and I love Egypt, etc. So I don't want to say bad things about people, but you go to the museums, and I think of the Urfa Museum in Turkey, where they have displays of material from Göbekli Tepe, and they have a reconstruction of Göbekli Tepe, and they have dioramas of how they were carving out the pillars, and they dumb it down so much they make them look like some kind of primitive cavemen basically doing it. They just don't want to give them credit. And then you look at, for instance, Jimmy, I'm sure you know Urfa Man, the
I was just going to bring Urfa Man up. I was just
yeah,
going to do
the
that.
incredible statue from Göbekli Tepe times that was carved life-size or a little larger than life-size statue. They weren't carving themselves as, quote, cavemen. I mean, he looks really sophisticated. He's wearing this chevron type of
V-neck,
V-neck,
stylish, man, stylish.
very stylish. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful carving. If that were a 20 or 21st century modern art carving, you wouldn't even question that it's modern. It's just and there's it's showing, in my assessment at least, incredible sophistication both in the techniques of the carving, but the individual it's showing in the carving. This is not a caveman. He's well groomed. He's wearing some kind of beautiful, probably what in real life would have been beautiful, some kind of clothing or tunic, or I don't know what you would call it, but it's not some primitive. When you look at Göbekli Tepe pillars themselves, as you know, some of them are anthropomorphic. They have arms and hands and a beautiful belt with a beautiful belt buckle, et cetera, et cetera. These are not simple primitive hunter-gatherers that just happened one day to wander into each other and decide, oh, we'll build a big stone structure. And
totally fashion forward, man. Totally fashion forward. One of these sites that gets overlooked is the Ramesseum.
Oh yeah,
and the Ramesseum, that statue of Ramses, when you see it in person, it doesn't compute. We're talking about a red granite, 75 to 100 foot tall statue of Ramses. The foot is his feet are like the size of my house, right? Yeah. And you look and his torso is I don't even know what 30 feet wide. I don't I don't know how many, and it's so perfectly smooth and carved, and you look at the size of, and then you just picture, and then that's not where I go with that, Robert.
Yeah,
I
no.
go, how?
Yeah, the question is how, and also the question that Katie and I talk a lot about, and I think other people are not now talking about, is how much of this really goes back to the time period it's said to go back to, how much was inherited and reused, how much was coming from an earlier time period and reappropriated, just like the Sphinx itself was reappropriated, just like we have now. And you can see this in the museum, the various, I can no longer say the Cairo Egyptian Museum because now there's several and they've been moving things around, but some of the smaller statues where you can literally see that different pharaohs would chisel their name into it, covering one over the other, etc. In Luxor Temple, you can see that too. So how much of this has been reappropriated maybe goes back. The level of sophistication is incredible. And to me, we're opening up, looking at it objectively and looking at the real evidence. We're actually opening up more questions than answers that we have. I think we're at the point we no longer can accept the standard dogma that this was done with the tools that we know dynastic Egyptians had at that time, or at least we think we know that they had.
It must have been really easy. That's the thing. And we look at it with our modern brains on how we deal with stuff today. All right, I get that.
I think that's a big problem. I think that's one of the problems is that too many people in modern times, they assume that they were doing things the same way we would do them. They're assuming that they would think about things the same way we would think about. They're assuming many modern archaeologists and academics, I'm not talking even the average person, but academics sort of have the underlying assumption, which they often don't admit, that these ancient people, whether it's the Egyptians or the Göbekli Tepe people or whatnot, that somehow they had the same priorities as we do, that they had the same inclinations as we do. And it may have been totally different. They may have had totally different technologies. They may have had totally different goals in mind. Some of that may have been shaped because they were in a totally different environment. I go back to that. I think the sun was very active during some of these periods, so they had to deal with things that we don't even think about, etc. So it's very hard, in my opinion, to get into their time frame, their time set, their mindset, and it's a big mistake to. And it's hard not to do, but it's a big mistake not to think of them in our own personal terms. Am I
That's
making
right.
sense?
That's right. And when, going back to the Ramesseum, so many tourists, those buses drive right past it. They don't stop.
Oh, yeah, they just ignore it. Yeah.
It's right there on the side of the road is a statue the size of the Statue of Liberty, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah. Of course, it's not standing up anymore.
It's not standing up. It's in pieces. It's huge. Okay, one single piece of red granite. It's incredible.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
let me ask you this, okay, to make sure you're in the dean's office tomorrow. As a geologist, is it possible that there could have been a chemical process? Or wait, let me finish. Let me ask the question first.
Okay.
Is it seems that when you look at something like that statue of Ramses, that it's too perfect and too smooth and with no mistakes. And is it possible that there could have been a process applied to make it malleable or more malleable than it is in situ?
The answer is, and the answer I was going to give you, and I didn't mean to start cutting you off, is that I just don't know. I don't know. I've looked into this. There's two things that have been suggested. One is that some of these are basically fake granite, fake rock, that somehow they were mixing substances, and I forget what the term is that some people use for it. They were basically pouring them, that type of thing. I don't think that's the case at all. When you look at the crystalline structure, etc., I don't think it's artificial rock or artificially recongealed rock. I don't buy that at all. On the other hand, using some kind of chemical, we'll just use the term loosely, acids, etc., to soften the surface and make it more malleable and easier to shape, etc., maybe to give final polishes to, etc. That I think is more within the realm of possibilities, but I don't have any definitive answer. I have read some technical papers suggesting that there might have been ways to do that, but it comes down to, there may be a way to do that they knew, that they had discovered somehow, which, in hindsight is really quite sophisticated, but in hindsight we don't know, and we might someday figure that out if that was the case and say, well, in hindsight, it seems really simple after all, but it wasn't so simple to figure out. But I don't know. I mean, this is it's a real problem no matter how you look at it. So I don't think
we just don't have it in Egypt. You go to Sacsayhuaman.
Yeah, you have it around the world. That's the thing. Was there something that they were using around the world to soften the surfaces of rocks to make them more malleable? Don't even want to use the term malleable, but more easy to shape, even if it was to soften it and allow it to be cut more quickly. I just don't know. I mean,
because you know what complicates it for me is that, okay, shaping a small piece of granite is one thing, but doing it on an industrial grand scale,
Yeah.
that's all. That we're talking about a huge industrial
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Sacsayhuaman, that's not one stone.
Oh, that's huge.
Frigging field,
huge.
a mile wide with multiple levels. And those stones, again, are the size of a house.
Yeah, or Ollantaytambo or any of those sites. It's really incredible. So no, I don't dismiss the possibility that something that was happening, but I can't say it was because I don't have good evidence that it was happening. What I do believe was the case, or don't believe was the case, I should say it that way, is I don't think that these are artificial stones. I don't think that they're just, because I've looked at the crystallography of them. I've looked at the, some people want to say that all the pyramid is made out of primarily cast stones, essentially like a concrete type of slurry, and then recongealed, etc. But in fact, the stone matches the stratigraphy, it matches the layers, to put it simplistically, of the quarries where it came from, etc. And it wasn't that simple. They weren't just, using stone rubble and then recongealing it and molding it. They were doing something much more sophisticated with natural stone.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And then you throw in for me, we have the size. That's crazy. You have the weight. That's crazy. You have it that it was shaped. Okay, that's crazy. You put all of that into the time period where this is supposed to fit. That's the part that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because at 3000 BC, again, going with the dogma, right? Mm-hmm. Going with Orthodox academia, 3000 BC, you have allegedly Stone Age tribes wandering out of the Sahara Desert, arriving at Giza. Remember, that was first, right? The pyramid, right? That stuff was for all that other stuff, Abydos and that Luxor. That's all later. That's later. But that these nomadic tribes one day walk out of the desert and level off the Giza plateau and engineer these structures.
No, I think it's ridiculous. Actually,
that's crazy. That's just that's insane.
And see,
it just doesn't make any sense.
No, and see, this gets back to something I was saying. I can't remember if it was before the break or not, where you have this continuity in Egypt. Remember, I was saying that Narmer looks Egyptian, up to Cleopatra looks Egyptian for over 3,000 years. And many Egyptologists even have pointed out or have commented, even in an offhand way, that it's like Egypt just appears full blown 5,000 or plus years ago. It's Egyptian, and it doesn't, I'm not saying it was stagnant, but it doesn't change. It does. Stylistically, it's Egyptian, and you have this continuity. So where does that come from? Things don't just happen full blown like that. If it's coming from a forgotten civilization, if it's coming from something else, and the analogy I often use, because Katie and I talk about Siddha, the solar-induced dark age, that they were rediscovering something. They were going back to something that was earlier. Just like, to use the analogy people understand in Western society, the Renaissance, which rediscovered the Greco-Roman culture, and you have the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages in between. The ancient Egyptians themselves talked about what was known as Zep Tepe, which was supposed to be a golden age thousands of years prior to what we would see as the beginning of Egyptian civilization, circa 3100 or 3000 BC. They themselves said that there was, a period well prior to that, and they enumerated, etc. Of course, this all gets dismissed by classical Egyptologists and archaeologists and historians that, it's funny how many modern academics pick and choose. If the Egyptians say something that they like about their history, they say, oh, yeah, they were correct. They knew what they were talking about. If they say something that they disagree with because it pushes things back too far, well, that's just myth and legend that they were using and making up to aggrandize themselves, but isn't really true. I think we're
Well, it's
finding
the same thing with the Göbekli Tepe. It's the same thing with Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is not Turkish. It's not. It's not. Right. It's not
Turkey didn't even exist at that time.
No, Turkey didn't exist. It was the Armenian highlands, and probably
Armenia
before.
Armenia goes back to a much earlier period.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, we'll end the show on this. Geographically speaking, especially back then, Göbekli Tepe is not far from Cairo. It's not. It's not far from Giza. I'm not saying you could walk it, but you could. But geographically speaking, they're very close.
Oh yeah.
Now 7,000 years apart, allegedly. But could it be that it is the same culture, or at least those who taught and were teaching these construction and these engineering principles came from the same source?
I don't think they were the same culture, but it depends on how you define culture. Were they in contact with each other? I suspect absolutely they were in contact with each other, and probably coming from an earlier source. I believe, based on the evidence, when I say I believe, that we had a civilization, and I use the term now civilization as we use it today for global civilization. So you had the sophistication with different geographic expressions of it. So I do think there's probably different geographic expression down by the Nile versus up and what's northern Mesopotamia, the Göbekli Tepe region. But were they part of a larger overall complex? Yeah, probably. And I'm sure they were trading with each other, interacting with each other, spreading ideas back and forth with each other. And I think they came from, earlier Urian, I'll call it, civilization, or what I call the Urian civilization at that time, this earlier cycle of civilization. So, it's sort of a matter of definition. Oh, were they the same civilization or not? Were the same culture or not? Because we use these terms in different ways. But yes, they're not that far apart geographically. I have no doubt that the people in the Nile Valley and the people in Mesopotamia and right up to northern Mesopotamia were interacting with each other. They knew who they were trading, etc., both in ideas and physical. And then again, the Cappadocia region, and that's a whole nother thing we didn't get into, but the underground cities there, which I'm convinced go back much earlier than the standard archaeologists in Egypt, standard archaeologists and prehistorians and historians believe was the case. They were used later. All these structures were used later, if they weren't totally buried and forgotten about. So there's a huge story here that I think we're just beginning to figure out.
Everything is connected. Everything
connected. Absolutely.
Everything is connected.
Okay, one last couple of plugs in.
After I say one last thing.
Okay.
So I'm at Tiwanaku, right? And filming and doing my stuff. And I'm not even bringing up Pumapunku. But anyway, so I'm on the back half of Tiwanaku, and I'm coming around the corner into the courtyard there, and there's this pillar, and I come around the front of it, and I'm filming, and I look, I was like, Göbekli Tepe.
I know, it's very similar.
Right. And I step back, the hands, right, the belt, and I walk and I film the whole thing, and and I'm by myself, and I'm freaking out, right? And I'm alone, and I was like, no, I have never heard anybody mention this, but
No,
it's like in your face, man. That's kind of a hard one to dismiss, isn't it?
yeah, but how about the other site? I mean, when I say the other site, the other one that comes to my mind immediately is Easter Island and the Moai. This
Yes,
very
yes, yes.
similar positioning of the hands near the navel, etc. And some of the Moai that are not as well known on Easter Island. I mean, very similar to what you find at Göbekli Tepe and the Urfa Man, etc., etc. Yeah, I think there are a lot of connections, a lot of similarities, and I don't think that's totally random. I think there are interconnections. I mean, literally, people were trading or interacting with each other, number one. And number two, I think some of it comes from the same source. And so it comes from the same civilization, cultural source. And I think some of it comes from the same source of what they were experiencing, again, in terms of catastrophes at the end of the last ice age, solar events, etc. It's very interesting. I want to bring up one other person, Michael Witzel. He was, and I've interviewed him, and he's very senior faculty member at Harvard University, and he wrote a book on the origins, discussing the origins of the world's myths. I forget the exact title, but a scholarly book, a very scholarly, dense book. And he came to the conclusion independently that a lot of these, quote, myths and legends and whatnot, they have a commonality that goes way back. And he dates it way back to tens of thousands of years, a common cultural origin. And this is totally independent evidence for the same type of thing, that we have this commonality. We have these common cultural origins that were passed down. Total anathema to many standard ways of thinking, academic thinking, where, I remember learning as an undergraduate that civilization just happened to arise independently in different parts of the world and never had interaction with each other whatsoever. In fact, I remember learning specifically when I was an undergraduate and young graduate student that you could study things in the Americas and you could study things in the old world, Europe, and you could study things in the Far East, China, with the assumption and the dogma that they had to arise independently. So if things were going sort of similar in one part of the world and another part of the world, it's not because they were interacting. It was somehow, and I want to say magically, that, that's just the way things develop in civilizations. And, you could look at very close parallels. Why did they all use purple or whatever? That's just the way humans are. And there was no acknowledgement of the possibility that maybe it came from a common source, or that maybe they actually were a little more sophisticated and could interact with each other, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you get to the right. You get to the basics, things like bows and arrows, wheels, windows, steps. Everybody had the same idea at the same time.
At the same time, independently, despite the fact that no one had this idea for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, it just was in the
DNA. Yeah, it was in the air. It was in the air. Okay.
And different people in different parts of the world who had no interaction with each other just all hit upon it at pretty much the same time.
It's magic. It's like Merlin. Okay, Robert, thank you. You wanted to
I want to put a couple of plugs
things.
Can I put in a couple of plugs? I will be speaking, I think it's on Saturday, the 1st of June, in a few days at the IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences. It is an online conference, so people, and all of this is on my website, so people can go to my appearances pages. I'll be speaking there, online conference. It's online for everyone. It's no physical conference, so I'll be speaking there. If people are interested in that, because it's a really interesting conference about all kinds of, we'll call it weird stuff from an academic point of view, but very serious scientists. Then a lot of people have said, well, why don't I ever speak on the East Coast? Because usually things are out West. It seems like all the good conferences are out West, but Cosmic Summit is going to be on the East Coast. I'm looking at my notes on the 15th and 16th of June. So just in a few weeks, Cosmic Summit in North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
That's a big one. And I want to put a plug in for that. People, I think you can do it online if you want to, but it's a big one. And I think it's going to be well worth coming in person for that. So Cosmic Summit in just a few weeks, what did I say? The 15th and 16th of June. Then in the mid-August, 17th and 18th, I'm going to be speaking, you know about this, Gaia, at the Gaia Ancient Civilizations Conference in Boulder. Again, these are all on my website. And I'm also scheduled, more things may come up, but I'm scheduled in October to speak at the Conference on Precession Ancient Knowledge in October. That's mid-October, the 18th and 19th of October, and that's in Nevada City, California. So number of conferences coming up. I also hope people will buy Forgotten Civilization, not because I want to sell the book. That's always nice. But no, seriously, I want
get your knowledge out.
This knowledge. I want this to become more common knowledge. And something else I've been working with is the Organization for the Research of Ancient Cultures. And we're working on a documentary, educational documentary, the Oracle, we call it. Organization for the Research of Ancient Cultures is a not-for-profit, 501c3. We're a legal not-for-profit. If people want to get involved with that or donate, there's information about Oracle on the website. Just look for the Oracle tab on my website. And I also want to put a plug in. This is the German edition. Can people see that? But this is a book that Katie has written, and it's going to come out in English, if all goes well, next month. It's a children's book. In English, it's called Adriana and the Ancient Mysteries. Let me get it right. Adriana and the Ancient Mysteries, and book one is The Great Sphinx. So it's going to be a children's series that she's working on with myself and with Lisa Perkins, a friend of ours who is a beautiful artist. Illustrator, I should say, beautiful illustrations and whatnot. And Kay's reminding me that book 2 will be on Göbekli Tepe, and then we'll have more coming out after that. Here, try the illustrations again.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, beautiful. So this is a, quote, children's book, but we're thinking that's going to appeal to a lot of people, not just children, because it's not a baby book. It's a quite sophisticated book for, quote, children. But what we found when we've tested it on friends and whatnot is they enjoy reading it with their children. So for adults who want to share the ancient mysteries with their children, or maybe just enjoy it themselves. So all these things are
perfect. It's perfect for somebody like me. It's got lots of pictures.
Oh, well but that's how you learn. It's pictures, illustrations, and teaching. So anyway, people can go to my website to learn all about those things.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, Katie. And I miss the both of you. And hopefully we'll see each other sometime this year. But
absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
Got to get you back in rotation. We used to do like 3 or 4 shows a year. We got to get you back in rotation.
We'll get back to that. Yeah.
I'll talk to you. Thank you, Robert. Behave and be well. Thank you, Katie.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Robert, Schoch, and Katie. Listen, that is why I do the show. right there. And it means so much to me to have the friendship and trust that Robert and I have with each other. And yes, he'll be at the dean's office first thing in the morning. He's got some splaining to do. Thank you so much, Robert Schoch. An amazing conversation tonight. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John Aside. Thank you, Dex. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmasters, Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boys, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. And this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night, we've got Dave Foley and Tom Wheeler on the show. I want you to be safe. Göbekli Tepe.